SEP Fanfic Readings presents Aurelian by BittyBlueEyes. Chapter 25, Man of Mettle. Thump! Scree! Draco startled awake and looked around frantically. The first thing he noticed was the weight upon him, and the mass of curly hair splayed across his chest. At the sight of Hermione in her living room, he calmed slightly. His heart still raced from his sudden wakening and looking around the room slowly. While it was still rather dark, the sky outside the window was beginning to lighten, and the sound twittering birds met his ears. It was morning. Draco thought back over the events of the evening, and how they had led him to this place and position he found himself in. It all felt like a funny dream. The only real thing that still existed from it was the woman wrapped in his arms. He had been happy to hold her the previous night when she asked, but he had only intended to stay like that for a few minutes. He certainly hadn't expected to fall asleep, but he was happy he had. Though he dated in the past and even been intimate with a couple of women, he had never before woken with a woman in his arms. It somehow felt much more intimate than any of his other experiences. Mine, he thought. Thud. Draco looked up at the sound, remembering the sound that had startled him into wakefulness. The girl in his arms stirred at the sound. Her head lazily rolled to the side and snuggled into his chest. A split second later, she sat bolt upright in surprise. Draco smirked at her surprise and the funny way her hair fell. "Good morning," he greeted softly. "What?" She looked reasonably disoriented. He could see her trying to put things together in her mind. He reached out and gently stroked her cheek. "Oh, Merlin, I did it again, didn't I?" she asked miserably. "I am so sorry. I didn't mean to fall asleep again." Draco smiled at her warmly, and his fingers brushed her cheek again as he studied her face. Even in her early morning state, she was beautiful. You stayed," she realized. "Yeah, I fell asleep too," he told her. "I might have even fallen asleep first, so no apologies." Draco leaned forward and placed a light kiss on her lips. Hermione sighed contentedly and slowly let her eyes flutter open again once he retreated. What an incredible way to wake up! A warm, solid body beneath her and delicate kiss that made her dizzy. She laid her head against his chest again. Just for a moment, she told herself. "I could stay like this all day, you know," Draco whispered into her hair. "I don't want you to have to move yet, really, but I'm afraid that Aurelian might be in the kitchen." Hermione sat upright quickly again. "What?" "Scree! No!" she groaned. "Aurelian?" Hermione stood up and walked quickly to the kitchen. "Oh, Aurelian," she sighed. "Morning, Mummy!" Aurelian smiled brightly. He was standing on a chair that he had pulled over from the table and was working at the kitchen counter. "Aurelian, what did I say about making breakfast?" she asked with a pout. "Mummy say Mummy do it," Aurelian told her, "but Mummy and Daddy sleepin'." "If I'm sleeping, you have to wake me up, right?" Hermione reminded him. "Daddy too?" Aurelian asked. Yeah," she answered. She blushed and looked behind her to see Draco smirking at them both. "Planning on having me stay the night again?" Draco teased, kissing her neck. "No, well, for him, it's just easier to... I didn't mean... I love to get you flustered, you know." Draco smiled and kissed her neck again, which sent shivers down her toes. "Do you want to stay for breakfast?" she asked breathlessly. "Or do you need to get home now?" "Kind of early for breakfast, isn't it?" Draco asked. 6 o'clock is normal breakfast time since Aurelian," Hermione told him. "But if you don't want—" "I love breakfast," he told her. "I'm making breakfast," Aurelian told him proudly. "Aurelian, we talked about this," Hermione told him, looking at the mess on the counter. "Mummy does the cooking, not Aurelian." "Might make toast and jam," Aurelian beamed, still not looking at all remorseful. "Looks like you forgot to toast the bread," Draco observed. "I can't reach toaster," Aurelian said simply. Draco snorted a laugh. "And you're not supposed to use a knife either, are you?" Hermione said with her hands on her hips. "I didn't," he said, pulling a sticky spoon out of the jar jam. Hermione sighed again, deciding that it wasn't worth her effort to scold him any further. "I know you like to help, but I do the cooking. I'm going to clean this up now. You can have a bite if you want, but then what do you say about helping me make Belgian waffles with strawberry topping?" Like he could refuse that, Draco smirked. There are 3 guaranteed ways to make that boy smile. The color blue, Quidditch, or strawberries. "I like strawberries," Aurelian smiled. "I help you cook, Mummy?" "If you can listen, well, yes." "Daddy cook too?" If he wants to," Hermione said, looking over at Draco curiously. Or you could ask if he might want to play, she spelled out for him. Or, well, I don't know if you plan on going home before going to Harry's or not, but you could shower here if you need. I think I'll take you up on that offer. It might look a little suspicious to my mother if I come home in this time. He smirked. Oh, Merlin, your mother, Hermione whimpered. My mother won't know a thing unless she asks Perny the right questions. I doubt she'll be suspicious, though. She retired for the evening before I left, and it's not uncommon for me to go out late in the evening or leave the house early in the morning. She'll just suspect that I left the house before breakfast, he assured her. I don't even know why I care what she thinks after the way she treated me last night, she said grumpily. I know. She was horrible. And you were wonderful, Draco crooned, leaning in to kiss her neck once more. Okay, you have to stop doing that, she said quietly. Her eyes were closed and she bore a small smile and flushed cheeks. What? Kissing you? Well, like that, yes, and talking like that. It makes me feel like you're playing with me, Hermione said. Draco could tell by her smile that she did not dislike either treatment. And what game do you think I'm playing? I don't know. That's what makes it frustrating, she smiled bashfully. I like playing, Aurelian told them. I'm playing no games, Hermione, Draco told her seriously. I just like you. A light feeling swooped through Hermione's body when his lips found hers. I like you too, Mummy, Aurelian said, making his way to stand between his parents. Hermione and Draco couldn't contain their laughs and parted. I love you too, Ori, Hermione told him. Me too, little man, Draco said, ruffling Aurelian's hair. I'm going to have that shower now. Okay, we'll start breakfast, won't we? Hermione asked the jam-covered toddler. And after breakfast, I think you'll need to get washed up too. Now, do you think you can be very careful and get 2 eggs from the icebox? Good morning, Miss Hermione, Mr. Draco, Mr. Aurelian, Creature greeted with a small bow. Master Harry is expecting you. He awaits your company in the sitting room. Creature shall go ahead to announce your arrival. Thank you, Creature, said Hermione. Aurelian read ahead of them and trudged quickly up the kitchen stairs. Careful, Aurelian, don't trip, Draco called after him. Hermione smiled at Draco and followed the toddler at a casual pace. Morning, Harry, Hermione greeted. Ron? She added in surprise. I didn't know you were going to be here. Morning, he and Harry greeted together. Yeah, well, I'm actually just here to pick up Aurelian, Ron told her. What? Hermione asked. Oh, Harry said that it might be best that someone watch after him in case something comes up and you need to move quickly, Ron replied. Ginny's got plans with Luna, and Mom said she'd take him, but Aunt Muriel says she's sick and that Mom needs to go look after her. Today's my day off, so I'm what's left. There's no way I'd let that poor kid suffer Aunt Muriel, and I don't mean because of whatever illness she thinks she's got. You? Draco asked skeptically. Yeah, Ron answered, pulling his shoulders back proudly. He looked rather indignant at Draco's distrust. Just you and me today, sport? Yay! Aurelian said excitedly. What'd we do? I don't know, he said. What do you think? Throwing back some fire whiskey, picking up some nice-looking witches? He smirked at Draco as he said this. Draco's eyes narrowed. Ron, Hermione said in exasperation. Or maybe we can go back to the burrow and play some games, Ron told Aurelian. What do you think? What games? Aurelian asked. Don't know. Your choice, he answered. Thank you, Ron, Hermione said sincerely. No problem, he told her. And I'm sorry about last night and that message thing. I'll take that kind of thing more seriously from now on. Thank you. And Malfoy, be careful. He looked like it was rather difficult for Ron to say, but it meant so much to Hermione that he did. Draco was stunned dumb and simply nodded. Okay, Squirt, Ron said. His casual voice returned. Tell your mom goodbye for now. Bye, Mummy, Aurelian said, hugging his mother's legs. She bent down and gave him a proper hug and gave her a quick peck on the lips. He then moved to Draco to do the same. Bye, Daddy. Draco looked quite uncomfortable when the little boy puckered up his lips. He glanced quickly at Harry and Ron before giving Aurelian a quick little kiss. When he stood back up, he looked unnerved, and Hermione squeezed his hand. Ron rolled his eyes at Hermione's move rather than Draco's. We'll see you later, Ron told them. Come on, Ari. Harry checked his watch. Are you ready for this, Malfoy? Of course, Draco answered. Hermione, Harry addressed her. Malfoy and I mentioned last night that it might be a good idea to be cautious, maybe have an emergency escape plan. I was wondering, well, I know you know how to make a port key, but do you know how to make the ones like we saw in the pensive, something that will activate upon touch? She thought for a moment. Yes, I think I can. I've never done it before, but I understand the basic principle. I think that's a rather brilliant idea, too. If it works all right, I think we might want to start putting it into regular practice. It's rather brilliant, but I'm willing to bet it was you that came up with the idea in the first place, Harry smirked. After seeing it in practice, Hermione said, even though it looked like it wasn't very helpful, I think that the shoe would be perfect place for it. If it were anywhere else on the body, it might be touched too easily. I agree, Harry answered. You think the shoelaces would work? She asked. That's fine, said Draco. Just make sure that it has a spell on it so that it doesn't come untied. Hermione knelt on the floor and surprised Draco by removing his right shoe. Sorry, I should have warned you, she smiled. In case it goes wrong while I'm casting, it would be best for you not to still be in it. I'm going to have it send you back to this exact spot, all right? Fine, Draco answered. But how am I going to put that back on without touching the laces? Just lift your foot, Hermione instructed. As soon as Draco's foot was off the floor, the shoe fitted itself onto his foot and the laces tied themselves. You're really going to have to teach me some of these spells of yours, Draco told her, staring in awe at his shoe. I know, Harry chuckled. Me too. So that you can both learn to be lazy? I think not. All right, Malfoy, it's just about time. Here's my shield cloak for you to borrow. We'll buy you your own soon, and here's the invisibility cloak also, Harry said as he handed over a thick black cloak and a flowing silky cloak. I can operate under the invisibility cloak, right? Draco asked. Yes, said Harry. Now, I'm sure you already realize, but we really don't know how long you're going to have to be there. I mean, I hate to say it, but I could be there till nightfall. I understand, Potter, Draco assured him. I'll be there as long as it takes, and no longer than that. Good, said Harry. But in case the longer possibility is it, I had Creature pack you a little food. It's really nothing much, just a sandwich cut in two, but it's something. Thanks, Draco responded with an odd look on his face. He was glad Harry had considered it, as he hadn't, but it was still strange to have Potter thinking not only of his safety, but his comfort. No problem. Just be careful, Harry said seriously. Draco nodded. Right shoe, Hermione reminded him. Her eyes were shining. She was scared. The fears of having no contact with him and having no idea when to expect him back were nearly as frightening as the idea of what could possibly go wrong. I'll be fine, Draco told her. Hermione nodded, looking no less worried. I'll walk you out, she offered. Harry looked away from them uncomfortably and walked further into the sitting room to give them privacy. Hermione walked Draco to the front door of Grimmauld Place and stopped. Be careful, please, she pleaded. I'm not just saying it. I want you to be cautious. Stay back. Stay hidden. Don't go poking around, okay? Please. I'll be cautious. Constant vigilance, right? He smiled softly. He stared deep into her eyes. He knew that he should be feeling insanely nervous, and he was sure that he was, but it was just a quiet hum in the background as he stared at her. He still couldn't believe that she cared about him so much. Constant vigilance, Hermione repeated quietly. Her hands reached up behind his neck and pulled him down for a passionate kiss. It was perfect, intoxicating, but it wasn't enough. She left him wanting more. It was an itch that he felt she'd placed on him to make him want to return all the more. He wouldn't be able to forget it until he was able to continue it when he returned. Try not to worry, he told her. I'll be back as soon as I can. She nodded and nibbled her bottom lip as he opened the front door to leave. I'll be waiting. Draco had the shield cloak in place and threw the invisibility cloak over top. He vanished from her sight before he vanished from the property. It wasn't until she heard the familiar pop of apparition that she closed the front door. There was nothing to do now but wait. Draco apparated directly to the alley beside Brim's goblet right after he said goodbye to Hermione. He checked the street to see if it was clear and watched as one man with a set of keys jingling in his hand passed. He was the only other person there. A shopkeeper going to open for the day, Draco assumed. As soon as the man passed, Draco set up a charm on the entrance to the alley he was hiding in. It was a spell meant to warn him of anyone entering the area. He then turned around and surveyed his surroundings. The narrow alleyway formed an L shape around one side and back of the pub. The part that was visible from the main street was empty, but when Draco went around the back, he found it very cluttered. The wall against the back of the pub had a single, handleless door, and on either side of the door were piles of rubbish. There were large empty barrels and crates, 2 half-rotten broken chairs, and a tall, rickety ladder, and several other items. Draco looked around cautiously and moved toward the second large barrel, the spot where the delivery was to be made. 3 empty crates sat on top of it, and he levitated them so that he could have a look inside. He found nothing but a large assortment of empty bottles. Draco placed the crates back down on the barrel, just the way he had found them. and walked to the end of the alley, where a simple brick wall matched the building. Long planks of lumber stood up in the one corner, the tops of them rising above the wall. They were loosely covered in a tattered piece of tarp, presumably to protect them from the elements. Draco decided that that spot would provide a nice place to wait. It wasn't far from the barrel, but far enough and sheltered enough to feel safe and out of the way. The only problem with it was that it seemed like a perfect hiding place. If he were the one conducting business there, it would be the first place he would look to see if someone was hiding. His method of hiding was the cloak, and it would probably be safer to stand in the open, rather than someplace where someone would look. Draco, instead, walked to the empty corner and began the process of simply waiting. A short while later, Draco decided that waiting was terrible. He had never been a really patient person, and the idea that he could possibly need to wait there until nightfall was frustrating. He tried to tell himself that he probably wouldn't have to wait very long, but even then he was looking at probably a few hours. He thought back to when he and Hermione had to simply wait inside the pub only days before. That was frustrating at the time, but it seemed like nothing compared to what he faced. He hadn't liked everyone watching him, but at least he'd known that Hermione was close. In the alley, he was alone, and getting more frustrated with waiting after only a few minutes. It wasn't long before he started making up silly little games to occupy his bored mind. He started counting the bricks on the wall and measuring items by brick size. The barrels were about 12 bricks tall, while the height of the alleyway was 47 bricks tall. He himself measured in at 23 bricks. He had to check that figure several times as it was difficult to judge when he was not visible under the cloak. When he grew bored with counting bricks, he started to try and guess the next place the fly, the only other being in the alley, would land next. He was surprised by how long the fly would stay in the air and began counting the seconds as well. Draco was disgusted with himself for coming up with such stupid games to occupy himself, but was even more frustrated that he didn't seem to take up enough of his time. After a couple of hours, he could no longer concentrate on the stupid, mind-numbing activities. The heat of summer had hit him the moment he stepped out of Grimmauld Place, but it seemed to get worse each minute. If the heat and humidity weren't bad enough on their own, Draco was buried beneath Potter's wool-shield cloak. He caught himself pulling at the collar every few seconds as he sweated profusely. He felt the perspiration soaking the edge of his hair, as well as his clothing. Every couple of minutes he felt a droplet condense between his shoulder blades and slide down his spine. Hell, even his eyelids were sweaty. He considered removing the heavy cloak several times and desperately tried to convince himself that it'd be perfectly fine to do so. Why would he need a shield cloak if he had the invisibility cloak anyway, right? He knew it wouldn't be safe to do it, though. Safety first. He would just have to suffer through it. He wasn't sure he had ever felt as thankful for magic as he did just then. He was at least able to conjure a glass and fill it with water to keep himself hydrated. He couldn't do it often enough, though, as he still needed to be cautious. He was hidden under the cloak, but conjuring made noise. It was rather quiet, but he needed to be silent. He stood there most of the time, dreaming of ways to cool down. He told himself all of the things he would do when he left there. He would get some ice cream or an ice lolly. He would take a shower. Maybe he could talk Blaze into going swimming with him. He felt a twinge when he remembered how angry Blaze was with him. He wasn't about to let that dissolve his dreams of coolness, though. Maybe Hermione would go swimming with him. He was sure Aurelian would probably like it, too. Hermione had just bought the little guy a swimsuit. At some point in all of his daydreaming, his prayer for water was answered in the form of rain. Just when Draco had managed to blur his thoughts, the heavens opened wide and began to soak the world in a contemptible, torrential downpour. Draco had only a second to ponder if the invisibility cloak was water-resistant before the question was answered. Only 2 minutes after the rain had started, he was soaked through. 30 minutes after that, the rain was still fierce. His clothes were heavy and pulling him down. He was shivering, and his skin was beginning to shrivel. His fingers becoming pruny. In his misery, his daydreams moved on to things along the lines of laying his fist into Potter. He wasn't sure why the thought was so appealing, but it was. He was miserable and irritated, and all he kept thinking was, why didn't I just let Potter do this? Draco let his head fall back against the wall and sighed. Just as he did, he felt a strange sensation. A shiver-like rumble ran across his body. He tried, at first, to convince himself that it was just the close thunder that created the sensation, but he knew it wasn't. It was his spell. Someone had just entered the alleyway. He stood tall and quiet, his hand on his wand. If this was what he was thinking, then it should be Katie Bell coming around the corner any second. He had no intention of harming her. He just needed to be on guard. Draco's body stiffened when he saw the tips of her black leather shoes appear, followed by the swish of her long black cloak. She walked slowly, each step hesitant. He knew it was her the second she came into full view. She was clad in a long, black, hooded traveling cloak, which hid her face, but he knew it must be her. The form was undeniably female, and the demeanor was one of great apprehension. If he still had any doubts, they were quashed the second she started to nervously check her surroundings. She looked like she would rather be anywhere but there. Katie walked straight up to the second barrel against the wall and looked nervously to her right and left again. Draco couldn't move or breathe when she seemed to look directly at him. He was relieved, though, when she took no notice of him. Potter's cloak certainly was incredible. She levitated the crates above the barrel and reached into her cloak. Draco waited with bated breath to see what she would produce. She looked around nervously again, and Draco became irritated. He wished that she would just get on with it. She looked so reluctant. Draco listened to the tink sound that the rain made upon the empty bottles in the barrel, becoming more and more impatient. Finally, she opened her cloak and quickly slipped something into the barrel. Draco nearly cursed aloud when he was unable to see what it had been. The way she had opened her cloak had blocked full view. He could tell by the way she moved it that it must have been heavy, but he had no idea even its relative size. Katie replaced the crates and stood unmoving. She stared at the barrel unseeing. Without seeing her face, Draco understood what she was thinking, but had to suppress the urge to tap his foot impatiently. What was she doing, just standing there in the rain? He watched her head clenched tightly around her wand. Her shoulders pressed back with determination. She looked down the alley, the direction from which she had come, and then looked at the wall at the other side, the place where Draco stood. She turned and walked resolutely toward the place where the alley dead-ended. Draco looked panicked, worried for a moment that she sensed his presence. When she came to the wall, she reached out and touched the lumber leaning against it. She took a deep breath and stepped into the thin, sheltered area behind it. Draco stood there gaping at her. What was she thinking? Draco's heart began to race. This girl was being an idiot. She was trying to catch whoever it was that was coming to collect the delivery. Of course, so was he, but it was different. She was being stupid about it. She didn't have any idea what she was up against, and she certainly didn't have protection or good hiding like he did. She was putting herself in danger and could very likely screw up the whole plan. He knew that something might go wrong with this mission, but he certainly hadn't expected Katie to be it. Stubborn Gryffindor! Even with as angry as he was over her, Draco couldn't help but admire her bravery. It was beside the point, though. She couldn't be there. It was dangerous and bound to make the entire mission a disaster. His mind worked frantically to figure out the best way to make her leave. In his panic, his mind only seemed capable of half-thoughts that went full circle. He thought of everything from politely asking her to leave to using the Imperious Curse to make her leave. The thought of the Imperious Curse actually made him feel ill. He wouldn't dream of using that curse again, and most especially not against her. She had been the one that suffered the last time he used that curse. It wasn't directed at her, but his use of the curse on Madame Rosmerta is what put the deadly cursed necklace in Katie's hands. Draco shook those thoughts away. It wasn't the time for guilt. He needed to figure out how to make her leave. He knew that he really couldn't risk revealing himself, so the only logical idea that came to mind was finding a way to frighten her away. The minutes passed faster than Draco liked as he desperately tried to think of a good way to scare her away. He thought of a light little shock, but she would likely start sending random spells at unseen attackers. Just about all other spells he thought of would have her reacting the same way. He had to think of something that would scare her, that she would not believe came from a person. Finally, an idea came to him and he prayed it would work. He took a deep, silent breath and mutely muttered a spell. He watched as a gallon-sized chunk of brick near her feet transfigured into a large living spider. It made his skin crawl as he watched it and waited for Katie to take notice. With its size, it wasn't hard to notice, and Katie gasped, forcing herself further into the corner away from it. She looked terrified and ready to run, but then she surprised Draco by shooting a quick fire spell at it, incinerating it instantly. In case that wasn't enough, she proceeded to vanish the ashes that were left behind. Draco's panic suddenly turned to anger. Why wouldn't the stupid girl just leave? She was ruining the original plan, and then even destroyed his only good plan to try to get her to leave. He didn't know what to do. She had already been standing there for 30 minutes. He didn't know when the person was due to collect whatever she'd hidden in the barrel, but he had to assume that it could be any minute. After a few more minutes of thinking, Draco was shaken by the return of the sensation produced by his charm. Someone else had just entered the alleyway. Draco's panic increased tenfold. Seconds. He had mere seconds to act. He stared at the girl standing completely unaware under the towering planks. There was no way he could send her away now. He had to protect her. Silencio, he thought with a quick jab of his wand. As soon as he cast the charm, he grabbed her roughly by the arm and pulled her to him, throwing the invisibility cloak over the both of them. She struggled fiercely but silently against him. "Shh," he whispered for her to calm. "I'm a good guy." Katie's head whipped around and her eyes bulged when she recognized her captor. She struggled even harder. "Damn it," he silently cursed. "Stupefy." The girl immediately fell limp in his arms. Draco thanked the heavens and the maker of the cloak that it was able to hide the flash of his spell, for just as he cast it, a figure came into view at the other end of the alley. The figure stood staring straight ahead. The person wore a black hooded traveling cloak, much like the one Katie was wearing, but this person was most definitely male. He was tall and held himself with pride. Draco wasn't sure what it was about the man, but he could feel his anger and determination. There was no way the man was there by accident. He had a purpose. After a moment of surveying the alley from where he stood, the man walked straight toward the barrels along the wall. He looked from one barrel to the next as Draco studied him intently. The man was definitely not one of his uncles, but there was something about him that felt very familiar. Draco studied the man's stance, hoping for a face to surface in his mind that would match the unknown figure. The man studied the second barrel, examining the outside and looking at the crates on top. Draco wondered what he was doing. Before he lifted the crates, the man looked around the alley again. He leaned to the side to check that the space under the standing lumber was empty. Draco clenched his teeth in anger. Katie could have been cursed into oblivion if she had still been hiding there. Satisfied, the man returned his attention to the barrels. Draco struggled with all of his willpower to focus solely on the man in front of him, but found it incredibly difficult as he also struggled with all of his physical ability to keep from dropping the girl in his arms, or making any noise. Katie was rather average in both height and weight, but she was, to Draco, insanely heavy at that moment in her dead weight. His right hand firmly gripped his wand, trying to keep it trained on the stranger. His left arm was wrapped around Katie's torso, and she hung limply forward. The combined weight of both of their heavy, wet clothes felt like they were dragging him down. Her body felt like it was slipping down out of his grasp, and he bent with her, as he tried not to lose her. Left with dropping her as his only other option, Draco heaved her upwards to readjust his hold. As he did, his shoe scuffed on the gritty, dirt-covered cobblestones beneath his feet. The man at the barrel turned immediately and Draco's eyes widened. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. He wasn't supposed to be caught. He desperately hoped the man would see that the corner was empty and believe that the noise had just been his imagination. The man reached into his cloak and took out his wand. The tip was aimed just to Draco's side. He then took a few cautious steps forward. He looked behind the lumber again and stared at the empty place. Katie was sagging in Draco's arms again, and he squeezed her as tightly against himself as he could. Still, her weight was pulling him down. His knees were ready to buckle, but he couldn't chance moving again. A sudden flash of red light startled Draco. The man had cast a spell into the apparently empty area beneath the towering planks. The spell bounced against the brick, and the man seemed satisfied. He turned his back on Draco and started back toward the pile of rubbish. He only made it one step, though. Draco's body could no longer take the strain of Katie's weight without readjusting, and he fell to one knee. He had only just barely contained an exclamation in pain, but the crack of his knee against the cobblestone and scuff of his shoe were not things the sound of the rain could mask. The man spun around again, this time with his wand trained precisely upon the place Draco knelt. Both men gripped their wands firmly. It was then, with the man coming nearer, Draco recognized the wand the man was holding. He knew that walk. He knew that wand. He knew that hand. And he knew that man. "Petrificus stupefy!" Draco shouted, cutting off the other man's spell. The man instantly lost consciousness, and his body collapsed at Draco's feet. Draco groaned and removed the invisibility cloak, stuffing it inside the wool shield cloak. He gently guided Katie's body to the ground next to him and slid himself closer to the unconscious hooded man. He flung back the man's hood and watched as the rain spattered down on his face. "Damn it, Zabini! Why couldn't you have just trusted me?" Still on his knees, Draco grabbed hold of Blaze's cloak in one hand and Katie's cloak, along with his wand in the other, and disapparated with them both.